My son raised his hand to me in my own kitchen, and I did not say a word. But the next morning, when he came down the stairs, believing I had accepted his disrespect, he froze when he saw who was waiting for him at my dining room table. I was at the head of the table, calmly smoothing out the lace tablecloth, when Michael walked in with that attitude of his, acting as if the house still belonged to him. He did not even notice the swelling on my lip. He was too busy thinking about himself. He grabbed a biscuit, took a bite, and started talking about how things were going to change in this house. But the words got stuck in his throat when the chair next to me moved. His face, still flushed from the alcohol of the night before, turned gray as ash. The biscuit fell from his hand and crumbled on the floor. In that instant he understood that my silence last night had not been fear. It had been a verdict. And so you understand how we got to that breakfast that ended up looking like a trial. Let me introduce myself properly. I am George Hayes, a father who decided that morning that love can also be justice. It was 2:47 in the morning when I looked up from the newspaper. The wall clock continued to mark the passage of time with that dry and monotonous sound that seemed to drill into the silence. Outside, the rain fell fine and constant, hitting the metal roof as if marking the rhythm of my own breathing. The house smelled of mint and old wood, and the cup of tea I had prepared an hour ago had gone cold, but it was still on the table next to an open album. I had taken it out of the bottom drawer of the sideboard, where I keep the things I do not want to see but cannot throw away either. On the first page was Michael, at 12 years old, holding a baseball bat almost bigger than him, laughing with an innocence that today seems from another century. I stared at him for a long time, wondering at what moment that child became the man I now barely recognized. I turned off the radio that was playing an old jazz tune. I did not want music. I wanted to listen to the rain, the sounds of the sleeping neighborhood. But something changed. The neighbor's dog began to bark nervously, and in the distance, I heard the noise of tires on water. My chest tightened. An old engine, the screech of brakes, and then the slam of a door. I knew it was him before I saw him. Stumbling steps came up the porch, and the keys jingled against the lock. He turned it hard and clumsily, and the door burst open, letting in a draught of damp air and the smell of alcohol. Michael appeared in the doorway, soaked, his jacket sticking to his body, his eyes bloodshot. He was holding an empty whiskey bottle, and his voice dragged with a mocking tone. "Still awake, old man?" he said with a stumble. "What? Were you waiting to give me a sermon?" He threw his keys on the entry table, and the impact knocked over the porcelain vase that Mary had bought in Charleston 30 years ago. I watched it shatter on the floor. I took a step to pick up the pieces, but Michael stepped on one with his boot and smiled, a bitter smile with no light in it. "Go up to sleep, son," I told him quietly. "We will talk tomorrow." He laughed with that tone that stabs at the soul. "Tomorrow?" "Sure, tomorrow we will pretend everything is fine, like you always do. You are an expert at pretending, right?" He opened the refrigerator, took out the last beer, and popped the cap against the edge of the table. The foam ran down his fingers and fell to the floor, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from his coat. He took a long drink and kicked an empty can that rolled across the floor until it hit the base of the stove. I approached slowly, trying to take the bottle from him, but he pushed me away with a rough slap of his hand. A glass fell from the shelf and broke into 1,000 pieces. The dry sound of the glass went through me like a blow. "You always thought you were right," he shouted, his voice loaded with rage and grief. "Even when Mom was alive, you made her suffer." I stayed silent. There was no possible defense against a drunk and wounded son. I avoided his gaze, but he took another step toward me, his eyes shining with fury. "Speak, damn it! Why are you quiet? Do you think you are a saint now?" I backed up until I hit the sideboard where Mary kept the wedding china. Before I could say anything, Michael grabbed me by the shoulders with a strength I did not remember in him. I smelled the whiskey, the desperation, and an old sadness. The fabric of my shirt wrinkled under his fingers. "Let me go," I said barely, without raising my voice. He did not let go. He pushed me violently. The glass of the sideboard shattered behind me, and the noise of breaking glass filled the whole kitchen. I felt a burning in my mouth. A fragment had cut my lip. I tasted the flavor of iron and shame. I fell seated on the floor, among the remains of porcelain and the echo of my own breathing. Michael stood there in front of me, breathing with difficulty, his chest rising and falling like that of a cornered animal. Then he raised his hand and slapped me. The blow sounded dry, almost unreal, as if it came from another place. "Do not look at me like that," he said through his teeth. "I am not a criminal. You are not a saint either." Then he turned on his heels and stumbled up the stairs. Every step made the wood groan. The door to his room slammed shut, and silence fell again, dense and almost physical. I stayed sitting on the floor for a moment. I listened to the ticking of the clock, the rain still falling on the roof, and the dripping of the spilled whiskey falling from the edge of the table to the floor. Everything mixed into a sad symphony. Then I took a deep breath and forced myself to move. I picked up one by one the pieces of glass and porcelain, put them in a bag, and cleaned the bloodstains with a damp cloth. I felt no pain, only an ancient tiredness that weighed on my bones. I went to the sink, turned on the tap, and let the cold water run over my face. The reflection in the mirror gave me back the image of a man I barely recognized. Bruised cheekbones, messy gray hair, a barely visible tremor in the jaw. I looked myself in the eyes, but looked away immediately. I went back to the kitchen. The rain had let up, but the sky was still overcast. I drew the curtain and looked out. Michael's truck was still there, under the rain with the lights on. The drops hit the windshield as if they wanted to erase what had happened, but the scene remained the same, motionless. I took a dry cloth, wiped my hands, and turned off the lights one by one. I only left on the light of the oven clock, that small green glow that blinks in the dark like the heart of the house. I took one last look at the disaster, the table stained with beer, the remains of the vase, the fallen chair. Everything seemed frozen in a photo I would never want to see again. Before going up to my room, I stopped in the doorway and understood, without needing to say it out loud, that something had broken beyond the glass. That night, the sound of the rain did not lull me to sleep. It was a lament, and I knew, as things are known without thinking them, that nothing would ever be the same again. I walked slowly up the stairs, my hand resting on the wooden railing that creaked under my weight. The hallway was dark, except for the dim light of the small nightlight at the end of the corridor. The door to my room was still ajar, just as when I had gone down hours ago. Everything seemed calm, but that calm had the edge of an open wound. I went into the bathroom and turned on the light. The reflection the mirror gave me made me hold my breath for a few seconds. I had a split lip and a bruised shadow spreading toward my cheek. I wet a towel with warm water and pressed it against the wound. The burning forced me to close my eyes. Every touch of the cloth was a sting that reminded me not only of the blow, but of everything that had preceded it. I washed my face slowly, letting the water wash away the tiredness and the sour smell of fear. I changed my shirt, the white one stained with blood. I folded carefully and put in the sink, pouring a little detergent over it to let it soak. Seeing the pink thread the water formed as it mixed with the blood gave me a strange sensation, as if part of me was dissolving in silence. On the shelf was an old shaving brush and a rusty razor. I turned on the tap. The sound of the water filled the space, and for an instant I felt accompanied. I turned the knob until the stream became a murmur. I could not stand absolute silence, but I could not stand noise either. It was a dawn suspended in an intermediate point between yesterday and never again. I looked at myself in the mirror again. My face was swollen, my eyes sunken, my gray hair disheveled, and I had an expression I could not decipher. Behind me, the hall light flickered. I turned and touched the switch. The bulb went out completely. When I turned it back on, the clarity was cruder, showing every wrinkle, every line the years had carved into my skin. I went out to the balcony. The rain had ceased, but the wind blew through the oaks with a low, melancholic whistle. From there I could hear the dripping of the leaves and smell the wet earth. On the small porch table, the cup of coffee I had left half drunk in the afternoon still rested. I took it and took a sip. The liquid was freezing and bitter. I put it back on the table and stood watching the slow movement of the garden swing. It was the same one where Mary used to sit and knit scarves for the winter. Her wool was still kept in a basket next to the rocking chair, as if time had stopped the day she left. The seat swayed gently from the wind, and that slight squeak of rusted iron caused a knot in my throat. I looked up toward the window of Michael's room. Dark, curtains closed. The silence of that room weighed more than any scream. I went back inside. The cold air of the hallway made me shiver. I looked for my thick coat on the living room rack and turned on the gas heater. The blue flame began to vibrate, then turned orange, and soon the room filled with that dry heat that smells of metal. I let myself fall into the armchair in front of the fire and picked up the phone. 3 names I knew by heart appeared on the screen: Denise Johnson, David Miller, Paulette. I stared at it without touching any of them. It was early, but not so early as to keep hiding behind the silence. Still, I did not call. I left the phone on my knees and observed the living room. The wedding portrait hung on the wall. Mary in her ivory dress, smiling with that serenity I always knew I did not deserve. I got up, took down the picture, and put it on the table. I wiped my sleeve over the glass, removing the dust. Her gaze seemed to ask me something I could no longer avoid. How long are you going to let pain rule this house? I took a deep breath and nodded, even though no one could hear me. I headed to the kitchen. When I turned on the light, the disorder of the floor gave me back the exact image of the chaos I had left behind a few hours before. The trash still in the corner, the damp cloth on the counter, the empty bottle on the floor. Everything remained the same, but I was no longer the same. I put on my apron, took out the small pot, and filled it with water. I turned on the burner, and the gas whispered as it lit. While I waited for the water to boil, I opened the cupboard and took out flour, butter, baking powder, and a little buttermilk. It was the usual ritual. Making biscuits was my way of keeping sane, of occupying my hands when my soul did not know what to do with so much emptiness. I mixed the ingredients without looking much at the measurements. The smell of fat and flour began to prevail over the stale alcohol. When the dough was ready, I rolled it out on the board and cut it into crooked circles. I put the pieces on the tray and put them in the oven. The click of the ignition sounded like a heartbeat. I sat in front of the table while the kitchen filled with heat and that familiar aroma of melted butter. I took a crumpled paper from my pants pocket and, with a short pencil, wrote a few quick lines. 8 in the morning. Come. David, do not hesitate. They were the only instructions needed. The living room clock struck 4 o'clock with a metallic tapping. I got up to check the oven. The biscuits were starting to brown at the edges, and steam fogged up the glass door. I opened it a little to look inside. The hot air hit my face. For an instant, the smell transported me to another time, to the Sundays when Mary prepared breakfast, and Michael came running down the stairs. I closed the oven firmly. I took out the tray when they were ready. Steam filled the room. I put the breads on a rack, and the sound of metal contacting the cold surface produced a soft, hypnotic ting. I leaned on the counter and looked toward the digital frame on the shelf. The screen showed an old photo that repeated every so often. There we were, Michael and I, by the lake, holding a fishing rod and a tiny fish. He was 8 years old and had a smile that could light up the cloudiest day. I ran my fingers over the screen as if I could caress that moment. Tomorrow, I whispered, you are going to remember the first thing I taught you, son, respect. I stayed like that for a while, talking to the air, to the memory of a child who no longer existed. The oven continued to crackle, making small clicks that confused with the ticking of the clock. I went to the sink, rinsed my hands, and wiped the table with a dry cloth. I needed order, even if it was illusory. In silence, I placed everything in its place: the flour, the sugar, the measuring spoons. Routine had a power that bordered on prayer. I poured myself a cup of the new tea I had just prepared. The steam fogged my glasses, and I had to take them off. The kitchen smelled of bread and dawn. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, a gray tone announcing the end of the storm. I turned on the small radio on the shelf. A hoarse voice reported a domestic accident in the neighboring county. "Family violence," the announcer said, and I turned off the device immediately. I did not want to hear more stories that resembled mine. I walked to the living room with the cup in my hand. I left the tea on the table, next to Mary's portrait. I looked at her and smiled sadly. "I'm going to start over, love," I murmured, "but I will not do it alone." Back in the kitchen, I opened the curtain and saw how the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. I stood watching the rays reflecting on the drops on the large window. Each one seemed like a tiny mirror, multiplying my image over and over. A tired man, stained but still standing. I squeezed the paper with my notes in my fist. At 8 o'clock sharp, everything would begin. Denise, David, Paulette. 3 names, 3 pillars that still connected me to the world. Meanwhile, the house breathed with me. The biscuits clicked as they cooled. The oven fire murmured. The wind hit the back window. It was as if every noise formed part of a same compass, pushing me toward the inevitable. I sat down, wrote one more line on the paper: "Do not back down." I put the note in the pocket of my clean shirt and turned off the oven. The kitchen was plunged into an amber glow. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence, no longer hostile but expectant, as if the house knew that something was going to change. I opened my eyes and, without realizing it, murmured her name. "Mary, give me strength." The clock jumped, marking 4:30. I poured myself another tea and rested my head against the back of the chair. Exhaustion was overcoming me, but sleep did not come. In my mind, only one idea resonated, simple and firm: no more fear. Dawn found me there, sitting staring at the turned-off oven, while the smell of fresh bread mixed with that of warm gas and damp wood. Outside, a blackbird began to sing. Inside, the invisible stopwatch of destiny kept running, bringing closer the hour when I would have to do what I never wanted: face my own son. And in that instant, without drama, without tears, I knew that the day had already begun. The pendulum of the living room clock struck 4:15. Each stroke was like a deep breath of the house, a reminder that time went on, even if everything else seemed stopped. I had not been able to sleep, not a minute. My hands kept moving over the dough without haste, without direction. It was the second batch of biscuits I was preparing that night. The kitchen was impregnated with the smell of hot butter. The air was dense, warm, and steam fogged the glass of the cabinets and windows. I placed the new tray on the countertop. The metal touching the cold surface produced a clear, tiny sound, which got lost in the murmur of the oven. I washed my hands. The water dragged the flour and left a white trail that dissolved in the drain, swirling slowly like a tired whirlpool. Outside, it was no longer raining. The storm had gone, but in its place remained a tense calm, the silence after the scream. Through the fogged glass of the window, I could see the reflection of my own figure, blurry, isolated. It was a man alone in his kitchen, in the middle of the night, making bread as if his destiny depended on it. I opened the back door, and the cold air hit my face. The smell of wet earth mixed with that of rotting leaves and damp wood. The sky had that gray-violet color that announces dawn. On the fence, my old raincoat was still hanging, soaked, heavy with rain. I took it down, wrung it out with both hands, and hung it back up, this time well extended. Every drop that fell from the fabric sounded like a countdown. The distant hoot of an owl broke the stillness, and then the quick rustle of something running through the bushes. A stray cat, perhaps the same one that used to prowl at night. I stood for a moment, looking at the darkness of the garden, until I felt the tingling of cold in my fingers. I went back inside. I put the coffee pot on the fire and waited for the aroma to fill the air. When the first dark stream fell into the pot, that familiar sound gave me back a little peace. I served the coffee in my wife's blue cup, hers the usual one. The ceramic still had a crack on the rim, but I did not want to replace it. I drank slowly. The bitter taste warmed my throat, sustained me inside. I turned on the small radio on the shelf. A neutral voice announced the early morning news. Another case of domestic violence in Chatham County. The suspect was detained. I did not listen to more. I turned off the device with a slap of my hand. Silence returned, dense, charged. I went to the corner where I keep important documents. I opened the oak cabinet and took out an old folder. Inside were the deeds to the house, copies of Mary's inheritance, my savings book, everything I had feared Michael might touch. I sat at the table and reviewed it page by page. The paper smelled of dust and time. I stacked them carefully inside a yellow envelope. On the cover I wrote, with firm handwriting, in case of emergency. I stared at the words for a few seconds. Emergency. What I was living was one, but not of those that require ambulances, but those that demand courage. Our wedding frame was still on the table from the night before. I turned the photo so Mary's face looked toward the door. "You are going to be with me this morning," I murmured. I looked at my watch. The hands marked 4:32. The house breathed slowly. The hiss of the oven could be heard, and in the distance the murmur of a truck passing on the highway. Outside, the air had the thickness of contained dawn. I opened the refrigerator, took out butter, peach jam, and a couple of eggs. I prepared a third batch of biscuits. The oven turned on again with a low hum, and its light illuminated the kitchen with an orange tone. As I leaned over to put the tray in, the reflection showed me the bruise on my arm, now purplish. I observed it without surprise. It hurt less than the silence. I poured another cup of coffee and left it next to my notebook. It was the old diary where Mary used to write her thoughts on patience, love, and parenting. On the first page, in her round handwriting, could be read, "The limit of a father is not his strength, but his silence." I turned the pages slowly, feeling how every word weighed more than I could hold. I closed the notebook and put it back in its place. Through the window, the sky was starting to lighten. The rain had left pearls of water on the glass, reflecting the faint light of dawn. I heard the noise of the garbage truck on the street. The metallic sound of the containers falling broke the monotony of the sunrise. And then the creak, a slight movement on the upper floor. Michael, he was moving in bed. The wood of the ceiling complained with a long groan. I stayed still, holding my breath. I did not want him to come down yet, not before everything was ready. I looked at the clock again. It was a few minutes to 5. I knew I had to act before he woke up completely. I turned off the oven, cleaned the table, rinsed the utensils, and placed them orderly. Every gesture was part of a ritual, an attempt to return meaning to chaos. I opened the drawer under the stove, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote with a firm stroke, 8 in the morning, come. Be on time. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket. The wind blew hard against the windows, making the glass vibrate. I pulled the curtains until they were almost completely closed. I only left a slit open where the orange light of the oven entered, reflecting on the metal of the coffee pot. I sat down and took Mary's gold watch that I always leave on the sideboard. The second hand advanced with a barely audible click. I ran my thumb over the inscription on the cover, "For George, with eternal love." I closed my eyes for an instant. "It is time, Mary," I whispered. "It is time to put an end to this." I took the phone from my pocket and opened the contact list. My fingers stopped on Denise Johnson's name. I did not dial yet. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and waited. I knew she usually got up at 6. Outside, the sky was turning pink. The first rays of the sun insinuated themselves behind the trees, as if someone was slowly turning on a lamp behind the world. In the oven, the golden biscuits crackled slightly. The sound was small, but in that silence it seemed like a clock, marking an invisible countdown. I stood observing the kitchen, the clean table, the aligned chairs, the yellow envelope in the center, Mary's cup, our wedding photo oriented toward the door. Everything was arranged. Everything had a place and a purpose. I turned on the small television on the shelf. On the screen appeared the local news. A smiling presenter spoke about the weather forecast. Clear day, gentle wind, temperature around 65 degrees. I nodded to myself. A sunny day, a good day to face the truth. I turned down the volume and left the television on, just to not hear total silence. I took a cloth and wiped the last trace of dried beer remaining on the table. My fingers hurt, but I continued. I needed everything to be in order, not out of obsession, but out of respect. When one is going to face what one loves most, the minimum one can offer is dignity. The clock marked 5:30. On the upper floor, silence returned. Maybe Michael had gone back to sleep. Maybe he was pretending. It did not matter. I looked out the window. The street remained deserted, the houses still dark. In the distance, a line of light was beginning to outline the horizon. I poured the last coffee from the pot. My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from anticipation. I rested my elbows on the table and interlaced my fingers. On the surface of the coffee, the reflection of the lamp trembled, just like my breathing. I thought of the phrase Mary always repeated whenever something got out of control. Calm does not come alone. You have to build it. That morning, I was going to start building mine, brick by brick, truth by truth. At 6 o'clock sharp, the living room clock announced the hour with 6 dry chimes. I got up slowly, took the phone, and dialed. The tone rang once, twice, 3 times. While I waited for her to answer, I looked at the photo on the table. Mary kept smiling as if she knew that, after all, dawn would come. Then I heard Denise's voice on the other end, and I knew the day had really begun. The phone tone rang longer than usual, 1, 2, 3, until finally, a hoarse voice, still wrapped in sleep, answered from the other side. "George?" asked Denise with the thread of a deep voice. "What the hell are you doing calling at this hour?" I took a breath, looking for the words. "I need you to come to my house this morning," I said slowly. "It is about Michael." There was a brief silence. I could imagine her sitting up in bed, frowning. "Another drunk night?" she asked finally with a tired tone. "Worse," I answered. "He hit me." The sound of her breathing changed. I heard the click of the lamp switch, and then the rustle of a robe being adjusted. "Good Lord, George," she murmured. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Physically, yes. But I cannot go on like this anymore. I want to end this, Denise, once and for all." Her voice regained firmness. "What do you plan to do?" "I do not know exactly." I stood looking at the gray light filtering through the window. "Maybe call it a hearing, an act of justice here at my table. You, the law, and the truth." I heard the sound of a closet opening, hangers hitting against each other. "I will be there at 8, she said. "Dress well, George. Today is not a day for laments. It is a day for sentencing." I nodded, although I knew she could not see me. "Thank you, Denise." I hung up. I stayed for a moment with the phone still in my hand, looking at the kitchen bathed in the first glow of dawn. The flour particles on the table shone like gold dust under the light. I took a clean cloth and began to clean every corner, every stain, every remnant of the night before. I did not do it out of mania, but because I needed everything to have a purpose, an order. I went to the dining room cupboard and took out the white lace tablecloth Mary used on holidays. I spread it on the table carefully, smoothing every fold with the palm of my hand. Then I took the crystal glasses, washed them one by one, and placed them in a line, with the rims glistening in contact with the light. In the center I put a vase with white camellias, Mary's favorite flowers. There were still some left in the garden, pearled by the dew. In the oven, the third tray of biscuits was already ready. I took it out with a mitt, and the warm aroma of butter mixed with the smell of fresh coffee. I placed the breads in a porcelain dish, next to a small jar of peach jam. I also prepared a plate of scrambled eggs and some slices of ham. The kitchen, which a few hours ago seemed like a battlefield, now breathed calm. The sun was beginning to rise, and the orange light of dawn painted the walls with a softness that almost hurt. I went up to the bedroom. I opened the closet and took out my dark blue suit, the same one I had worn to Mary's funeral. I dusted it off with a trembling hand. In the closet mirror I saw my reflection, an older man with tired eyes and a bruise still staining his face, but with a determination I did not remember having for years. I shaved with slow movements, listening to the rasping sound of the razor. Then I put on a few drops of the old cologne Mary adored. The smell brought back her voice for an instant, that soft way she used to say my name. I went back downstairs, and before sitting down, I opened the porch door. The fresh morning air rushed in, bringing the perfume of oaks and the dampness of the earth. On the gravel path, the delivery man threw the Savannah Tribune from his bicycle. The newspaper fell on the steps with a dull thud. I picked it up and left it on the table, next to the coffee pot. The clock marked 10 to 7. In the distance, a rooster crowed, and a dog answered. The city was beginning to wake up. I went to the garden and cut a few more branches of camellia. The cold water from the well still numbed my fingers. I returned to the house with the flowers dripping on the floor. I arranged them in the vase, replacing the ones that had started to wilt. While I was adjusting a branch, the phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Paulette? George? Her voice sounded upset. Denise called me. Is it true what I heard? Did Michael hit you? Yes, I answered with a low voice. I need you to come too. Do you want me to come? To your house? And will there be police? I do not know yet, I answered. But I do not want to fight, Paulette. I want closure. There was a silence, then a long sigh. You were always stubborn, just like when you were young. She paused. Okay, I will bring my apple pie, and you make sure to have hot coffee. I smiled for the first time that morning. I have not tasted your pie in years. Well, today you will. See you soon. We hung up. The clock marked 7:20. Upstairs, the floor remained silent. Michael was still sleeping. Every minute of silence was a gift. I checked the table one more time. The silverware aligned, the cups clean, the tablecloth without a single wrinkle. I placed 2 chairs on each side, leaving the head of the table free. That is where Denise would sit. The sound of an engine interrupted the calm. A car stopped in front of the house. I looked out the window. A beige sedan, Denise's. She got out with a firm step, wearing a coat of the same color and a folder under her arm. I opened the door before she knocked. Good morning, Judge Johnson, I greeted with a slight smile. She arched an eyebrow. Do not call me Judge at this hour, George. She raised the folder, but I brought my law book, just in case. I have hot coffee and bread, I responded. Perfect. Justice also needs fuel. She entered with a sure step. Her heels resonated on the wooden floor like a metronome marking the rhythm of the inevitable. She took off her gloves, left the folder on the table, and sat at the head, where the sun hit softly. I took out 2 cups and served the coffee. The steam rose like fine smoke mixing with the light. Denise took a sip and looked at me over her glasses. And him? He is still sleeping. I looked at the clock. 15 minutes left. She nodded, crossing her hands on the table. Good. Then we will have time to think about how to do it. I sat in front of her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was solemn, like the one preceding a verdict. Denise took a small black notebook out of her folder. She opened it, turned some pages, and murmured, Sometimes justice does not need a court. It only needs someone to have the courage to say enough. I looked up. In the reflection of the large window, the light of dawn fell directly on Mary's portrait. Her smile seemed to observe us, quiet, approving. At 7:45, Denise took off her glasses and left them on the table. George, when he comes down, do not defend yourself with anger. Let your words be as firm as your hands. I nodded with a dry throat. I will. She took another sip of coffee, took a deep breath, and said almost in a whisper, Today we will not only judge your son. Today you will judge yourself, to know if you can forgive him afterward. I looked at the clock again. The hands seemed to move faster. The house was bathed in an expectant silence. The smell of bread still floated in the air, mixed with the soft perfume of the camellias. Outside, the sun was already fully up. I stood looking at Mary's photo, her fixed smile under the glass. The day begins, love, I murmured, and with it, the truth. Denise looked up toward the staircase, where the first creak of wood announced movement on the upper floor. Dawn was over. The morning had just begun. Denise was sitting at the head of the table. She had opened her brown leather notebook, the one she always carried when something serious was about to happen. Between the pages were folded papers and a black ink pen that she turned with patience. The steam of the coffee rose between us like a veil dividing the air in two, what had already happened and what was about to begin. I got up to check the oven. The last batch of biscuits was golden, with barely toasted edges. I took it out with a mitt, the metal still vibrating from the heat. I placed them in a wicker basket lined with a white cloth and left them on the table. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, butter, clean morning. But in my chest the dark weight of the night still remained. The digital clock on the counter marked 7:50 in the morning. Through the slits in the curtain, the sun was starting to enter like a line of gold cutting the room into two halves. Then I heard the noise of an engine approaching. I looked out the window. A silver truck advanced slowly along the dirt road and stopped in front of the house. It was David Miller, old friend and church companion, now a lieutenant with the county police. He got out of the vehicle with his usual calm, his dark blue uniform impeccable, tie straight, boots shining with the dew. Behind him, two young officers accompanied him, a tall boy with a serious look, and a brunette woman carrying a notebook in her hand. I opened the door. The cold, damp morning air entered along with the smell of gasoline and wet earth. Thank you for coming, David, I told him. He shook my hand firmly. We are here to ensure everything stays under control, he responded with a firm but friendly tone. I led them inside. We passed through the hallway where family photos, covered in a fine layer of dust, still hung. In one of them, Michael, about 6 years old, was on my shoulders in Forsyth Park, laughing with his mouth open. That image tightened my chest, but I kept walking. Denise looked up upon seeing them enter. Punctual. As always, Lieutenant, she said with a half-smile. The law must arrive on time, Madam Judge, David replied, leaving his cap on a chair. The young female officer approached the table, took out her notebook, and started writing something. The other officer stayed near the door, observing the stairs. His presence was silent, but solid. I served coffee for everyone. The aroma mixed with that of hot bread and peach jam. For a moment the house seemed to return to being what it once was, a home and calm. But that mirage lasted little. Denise was reviewing her notes, concentrated. She looked at me over her glasses. Is your sister coming? She asked. Yes, I answered. She is bringing an apple pie. She nodded without saying more. A few minutes later, 3 knocks sounded on the door. Dry, spaced out, familiar. I went to open it. Paulette was there, in her violet wool coat and hair tied back. She carried a tray covered with a cloth in her hands, and the smell of cinnamon escaped from the corners. So you are really going to do it? She whispered, looking at the purple bruise on my cheek. There's no other way out, I answered her. From inside, Denise's voice sounded clear. Come in, Paulette. We are almost all here. My sister entered slowly, greeted the police with a slight gesture, and left the pie on the table. The sweet aroma filled the room, mixing with the coffee. I looked at the wall clock. 7:58 in the morning, 2 minutes. I approached the window and closed the curtains a little. The light became softer, golden, as if the sun itself was holding its breath. Everything was ready. Then a creak upstairs. The wood of the floor complained under a heavy step. "He is awake," I said in a low voice. Denise closed her notebook and took off her glasses. "Get ready," she warned me. There was no turning back. The sound of a door opening cut the silence. I heard Michael's dragging steps on the hallway floor. He came down slowly, every step groaning under his weight. When he appeared in the threshold of the staircase, his hair was messy, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and a half-empty beer can in his hand. His eyes were swollen from sleep and alcohol. He looked at us all, not understanding at first. "What is this?" he grunted. "A family reunion?" I did not answer. His eyes moved around the room, first to Denise, sitting with the open notebook, then to David and the officers, then to Paulette, who remained standing next to the vase. The gesture of mockery on his face faded until leaving a confused grimace. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, lowering his voice a little. "Sit down, Michael," I told him, pointing to the chair in front of me. He hesitated for a few seconds. Then he let out a snort and walked to the table. The chair screeched as it dragged on the floor. He dropped into it, leaning his body back. Denise opened her notebook. "This morning," she said with a serene tone, "we are going to talk about limits and consequences." Michael let out a brief laugh. "Limits? What is this, a sermon?" "No, son," I intervened. "It is a conversation you have avoided for too long." His eyes glared at me. "And you brought police to talk?" He spat the words with irony. "Nice way to humiliate me." David stepped forward, saying nothing. The sound of his boot on the wood resonated like a warning. "No one wants to humiliate you, Michael," Denise said calmly. "But last night you crossed a line that no son should cross." The young officer next to the door stood firm. The agent with the notebook wrote without looking up. Michael squeezed the beer can between his fingers until it deformed. "You have no idea what you are saying," he murmured. Paulette, who had not spoken until then, approached slowly. "I do have an idea, boy. I saw how you treated your father the last few times I came. He kept quiet out of love. But last night, what you did has no name." My son fixed his eyes on her. "Do not get involved, Aunt. This does not concern you." Paulette did not move. Her voice trembled, but she did not back down. When a man raises his hand against his own father, that concerns us all. Silence fell again, thick. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The sun was already bathing the whole kitchen. Denise took a sip of coffee, put it on the saucer, and spoke firmly. "Michael, this is not an accusation. It is an opportunity. You are going to listen, and then you will decide what kind of man you want to be." My son looked down, rubbing the back of his hand on the table. "And if I do not want to stay?" he said finally. David responded without a threatening tone, but with authority. "Then we will leave with you, and this conversation will continue elsewhere, with another name." Michael did not reply. I looked at him fixedly. Despite the fear, I felt something resembling calm. "Sit up straight, son." My voice sounded firmer than I expected. "Today we will not talk about money, nor blame, nor the past, only respect." His eyes rose slowly until finding mine. For an instant I recognized in them a flash of that boy from Forsyth Park, the one who called me Dad with his mouth full of ice cream, but it vanished immediately. The clock struck 8. The chimes resonated 8 times, one for each year I had been carrying his resentment in silence. Denise closed her notebook. "Good," she said with a sigh. "Let the session begin." Outside, the song of sparrows filled the air. Inside, the smell of bread, coffee, and fear mixed into the same thick aroma. I interlaced my fingers and leaned forward, ready to speak. It was the moment I had waited for all night, and I did not know if it would end in redemption or ruin, but for the first time I had no doubts. The day had arrived. The chimes of the clock were still floating in the air when Denise tapped the table gently with her fingers. 3 times, as if dictating the rhythm of the inevitable. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the sparrows kept singing, oblivious to the tension impregnating every corner of my kitchen. David cleared his throat, opened his folder, and read with a firm voice, without drama, "We have received a report about a domestic assault incident at this residence." Michael frowned and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A report?" he repeated. "Who sent it?" I looked up, holding his gaze. "I did," I said calmly. At 4 a.m, my son's smile erased instantly. His jaw tightened. Then he threw the beer can on the floor, the liquid spreading over the parquet with a harsh sound. "What the hell did you do, Dad?" he spat. "All my life you told me that what happens at home stays at home. And now you sell me out like a criminal?" I breathed slowly, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I am not exposing you, son. I am stopping something before it destroys us both." Denise leaned forward. "We are not here to argue," she said. "We are here to establish the truth." Michael stood up abruptly. The chair fell backward with a dull thud. The 2 officers reacted immediately, stepping forward, hands ready but without violence. David raised his palm. "Easy. No one is going to touch you if you stay calm." My son breathed hard, looked around, measured the situation, and finally sat back down. He hit the table with his open hand. "Okay," he grunted. "Speak then. What do you want from me?" I got up, took the coffee pot, and poured a little into a clean cup. "Here," I told him, pushing it toward him. "Listen first." He looked at the cup, the steam rising like a white thread, and pushed it back. "Do you think coffee is going to make me feel guilty?" "I am not looking for that," I responded. "I just want you to listen." I turned toward the cabinet in the back. There, the broken glass of the sideboard continued, reflecting the sunlight. "That," I said, pointing to the damage, "is the memory of what happened last night." No one spoke. The light entered obliquely, projecting onto the wall the shadow of the crack, elongated and bright, like an open wound that would not heal. Paulette, in silence, took a handkerchief from her pocket and offered it to me, but I shook my head. Denise opened her notebook and read, with a clear voice, almost ritualistic, report of minor injuries, bruises on Mr. Hayes's face and wrist. Testimonies coincide in having heard a loud blow at 3:15 in the morning. Michael let out a nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous. You all agreed on this, right? A perfect scene." Denise closed the notebook calmly. "No one is against you, Michael. We are here to protect you from yourself." He looked straight at me, eyes wet with contained rage. "Protect me? You want to send me to jail, Dad?" I responded with the lowest voice I could. "I want you to wake up." The blow he gave on the table made the cups tremble. "You do not understand anything," he shouted. "Yes, I do understand," I said, maintaining my gaze. I was also the son of a man lost in alcohol. I know where this road leads, and I am not going to allow you to end up the same. The silence that followed was so dense I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Michael lowered his gaze, hands trembling on his knees. Denise made a slight gesture toward David. "It is time," she said. The lieutenant nodded, took out a notepad, and wrote a few lines. Then he looked up. "Michael, I need you to stand up." "What?" he asked, bewildered. "By protocol, we must proceed to a preventive detention," David explained without raising his tone, "just to guarantee everyone's safety." Michael stood up abruptly. The chair screeched. "No. No one is going to arrest me in my own house." The young female officer took a step forward. Her voice was soft, almost maternal. "It is not about punishment, Michael. Just cooperation." My son turned toward me. His voice was broken, eyes shining with desperation. "Dad, please say something. Are you really going to let them drag me away like this?" I looked at the clock. It was 8:10. The hands moved slowly, but every second weighed like a year. "I do not want to see you destroyed," I told him calmly. "I just want peace. For you? For me, he held my gaze. Tears formed, flickering on the edge of his eyes. His breathing became irregular, like that of a child trying not to cry. David approached slowly. The click of the metal opening the handcuffs broke the air like lightning. No one spoke. Denise stood up, her voice firm and clear like a final seal. "Michael, from today you will learn the first lesson any man should know. Respect for the one who gave you life." My son lowered his head. "Dad," he whispered with a thread of a voice. "Do not do it." I turned toward the window without answering. The sun had already risen fully, dyeing the white tablecloth with golden reflections. Denise made a slight gesture to David. "Proceed." The sound of the metallic lock was heard dry, definitive. Michael shuddered but did not resist. I remained seated, hands on the table. I observed the coffee steam still floating in the air. In that instant it reminded me of the incense of the old church Mary dragged me to every Sunday. A smoke that did not smell of forgiveness, but of acceptance. No one said a word while they escorted him to the door. The sunlight fell fully on the breadbasket, on the white camellias, on the grave faces of everyone present. When Michael crossed the threshold, his shadow projected for a moment on the kitchen floor, large, trembling, and then disappeared. "Son," I told him almost in a sigh, "this is not an end. It is the first time I let you be saved." The door closed. The roar of the truck's engine filled the air for a few seconds, and then faded down the road. I was left alone, with Denise and Paulette standing by the table. Neither spoke. David took off his hat in silence before leaving the air charged with that respect that only exists after a battle no one wins. The sun was already flooding the entire room. The house, after the noise and fear, seemed strangely quiet. I got up, collected the empty cups, wiped the spilled liquid with a cloth, straightened the fallen chair. Every movement was a way of breathing again. When I finished, I looked toward the window. In the glass, my face mixed with the reflection of the garden, an old man, tired but at peace. I took the breadbasket, placed it in the center of the table, poured one more cup of coffee, and left it in front of the empty chair. "Breakfast is ready, Mary," I murmured, "the breakfast of justice." Outside, the wind moved the branches of the oak gently. Inside, the clock marked 8:30, and for the first time in many years, the tick-tock did not sound like a sentence, but like the steady pulse of a house beginning to heal. When the police crossed the threshold with Michael, the house was split in two, the half where the heat of the coffee still floated, and the other where the air became so cold it hurt to breathe it. David closed the door softly without saying a word. The click of the deadbolt was heard, a slight but definitive sound, as if sealing the fate of everyone present. Denise returned to her place at the head of the table. She opened her old leather notebook and smoothed the pages with her fingertips, a gesture of a veteran judge accustomed to the silences before the truth. I remained standing next to the coffee pot, slowly pouring the dark liquid into her cup. My hands trembled barely. She looked up and told me with a serene tone, almost maternal, "You have done the right thing, George. But this is not over yet." I nodded. "I know." The roar of the patrol car engine rumbled on the porch, and then faded into the distance. The silence it left was so heavy I could hear the beats in my temples. Paulette got up without saying anything, walked to the kitchen, and opened the cabinet under the sink. She took some napkins and began to clean the beer stains Michael had spilled hours ago. She did it carefully, as if every stroke of the cloth also erased a part of the shame that had remained with us. "How long will they hold him?" she asked without looking up. David, who still remained near the door, responded, 24 hours. It is normal in a domestic assault case. If later George decides to withdraw the report, he can leave without charges." I stood still, looking at my wedding photograph hanging on the wall. The morning sun hit the glass just right, and the reflection projected onto the floor, crossing the crack of the broken sideboard. The line of light reached my feet and stopped there, as if the whole house was pointing out something I should not forget. Denise got up and approached slowly. "Do not rush to forgive him, George." Her voice was firm, but not harsh. Sometimes forgiveness without conscience only feeds the guilt of the other. I nodded, finding no words. David went out to the porch to talk to the two officers waiting outside. I heard the murmur of their voices, brief, practical. Then he returned. "Everything is in order," he said. "I will stop by the station to verify the booking. Maybe I will come back in the afternoon if you need me." I shook his hand. "Thank you, David." He looked me in the eyes a second longer than necessary. In that silence there was understanding, something men of a certain age no longer need to translate into words. Then he left. Paulette approached me and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Do you want me to clear the table?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, leave it like that. I want it to stay just as it is. Let this scene be engraved for a while." Denise looked at her watch. "It is 8:40, she announced. "Perfect time to start the second part." I observed her, confused. "Second part?" She nodded. "Yes. The first was the law. Now comes the word. Yours." She took a white sheet out of her folder and extended it to me along with her pen. "Write him a statement, George. Not for the police. For him. When he wakes up completely, he will have to read it." I sat in front of the table. The blank sheet seemed bigger than it was. The pen weighed too much between my fingers. I began to write slowly. "Son." The sound of the pen on the paper was the only noise in the room. Outside, a group of sparrows fluttered over the fence, pecking at the breadcrumbs the wind had dragged from the window. The smell of coffee filled the air again. Paulette put another pot to warm and left a tray with slices of pie on the counter. I wrote without stopping what happened, the words we said, the blow, the subsequent silence. I added no judgments or pleas, only facts. But between every line filtered something I could not hide, the sadness of a father who, even after everything, still wanted to believe in his son. Every time the pen scratched the paper, the sound reminded me of the wind dragging leaves on the porch. When I finished, I folded the paper in two and left it in front of me, holding it down with an empty cup. "It is done," I said. Paulette brought me a piece of pie. "Eat something, brother. You have not tasted a bite since last night." I took the fork. The taste of warm apple and cinnamon brought back sudden memories of childhood, our mother's kitchen, the smell of the oven, Mary's laugh before dinner. I swallowed with difficulty. Then we heard an engine approaching. The three of us looked at each other. "Again," I murmured. Through the window, the silhouette of the same patrol car could be seen stopping in front of the house. David got out first, and then opened the back door of the vehicle. He pointed to someone inside. Michael came out, his face pale under the sunlight. He had his wrists still marked by the handcuffs. He walked slowly, confused, as if he did not understand at what moment night had turned into day. I opened the door before they knocked. David looked at me. "He has calmed down. He is sober." He lowered his voice. "I thought it would be better if you spoke to him yourself." I nodded. David took off the handcuffs and pushed him gently toward the porch. Michael rubbed his wrists, looking around with a mix of shame and fear. The air smelled of earth and coffee. "Come in, son," I told him. "Sit down." He crossed the door, hesitant. The light of dawn hit his face, revealing traces of tiredness, but also a flash of confusion, as if he did not know whether to be angry or regretful. Denise sat back at the head of the table and closed the report folder. "This court," she said with a low but firm voice, "has not finished its session yet. Now it is the father's turn." Michael lowered his gaze. I took the paper I had written and held it between my fingers. It was exactly 9 o'clock. The dining room clock marked it with a dry stroke, and the sunlight entered directly through the window, illuminating the center of the table. I swallowed saliva and began to read. I said, "What happened last night was not just a mistake. It was a line crossed. I am not writing to punish you, but to leave a record of what I can no longer keep silent. In this house there are ancient wounds, some inherited, others learned, but none justify violence. My voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to another man. Denise watched me without interrupting. Paulette kept her hands interlaced on her lap. I raised you with what I had, and with all my flaws. Sometimes I failed, I know. But what you did last night was break the most sacred bond between a father and a son, respect. Even so, I am still here, not to save you, but to remind you who you are. You are not the blow. You are not the rage. You are the opportunity to start over if you have the courage to do so. I stopped. Michael did not lift his head. I have reported what happened, not to see you imprisoned, but so that we both wake up. Because if I stayed silent, I would be teaching you that love is impunity, and it is not. Love also corrects, also sets limits. I kept silent for a few seconds. The air vibrated with the hum of the clock. When you read this, you will know that I do not hate you, that I still wait for the day when we can sit at the same table again without fear. But for that, first you must recognize what you did, not before me, but before yourself. I left the sheet on the table. Michael remained motionless, shoulders slumped. His breathing was deep, irregular. Denise slowly closed her notebook. "You heard it," she said with a grave tone. "No judge can absolve what the heart denies." Paulette approached, left a cup of coffee in front of my son. "Drink it while it is still hot," she told him softly. "Mistakes also get cold if one does not face them in time." Michael looked up. His eyes were wet, but he said nothing. The sun had risen completely, flooding the room with a glow that seemed new. Everything smelled of bread, coffee, and truth. No one spoke for several minutes. Then, with a thread of a voice, Michael murmured, "I read it, Dad. Even if you did not hand it to me, I heard it." I did not answer. I just nodded. Denise put away her notebook and stood up. "Then the trial can be considered concluded," she said. "The verdict now depends on what he does with what he heard." The clock marked 9:30. Outside, the birds kept singing. Inside, the house, for the first time in years, smelled of something resembling forgiveness. I read slowly, every word weighing on my tongue as if it had been written with lead. "Son, I once believed that silence taught, that if I said nothing you would understand by yourself. But I was wrong. Silence sometimes is complicity." My voice did not tremble, but it sounded harsh, dry, as if the whole night had scraped my throat. Michael did not look up. His eyes remained fixed on the tablecloth, on a coffee stain that seemed to expand along with his shame. I continued reading. "You opened the doors of this house. I offered you my roof, my food, the security I built with the money left from my retirement. I did it so you could pull yourself together, so you could remember who you were. But you confuse kindness with obligation and compassion with power." A dry leaf fell from the oak in the patio, hit the window glass, and slid to the ground, like a reminder that even the strongest thing can let go when the moment comes. Paulette watched from the kitchen. She held a cup with both hands, and her fingers marked the edge of the porcelain with the tension of someone containing a cry that is not hers. Denise looked at me and nodded, like a judge approving the firmness of the witness. "Go on, George," she whispered. I swallowed saliva and spoke again. "When you raised your hand against me, you did not hit an old man. You hit your mother's memory, her patience, her sacrifices. You hit everything that formed you and gave you a name." The silence was so deep, I heard the tick of the clock hanging over the door frame, a rhythmic sound, almost mocking. Michael squeezed his hands until his knuckles turned white. Shame showed on his skin. I left the sheet on the table and pushed it toward him. "Now it is your turn to speak, son." For a few seconds nothing happened. The air in the room seemed stopped, motionless, as if time itself awaited his answer. Michael breathed deeply without lifting his head. His voice came out hoarse, broken. "I do not remember everything I did," he said. "I just exploded. Everything came crashing down, the job, the girl, the bills. I was not sleeping. I drank, and then, he interrupted himself, I did not mean to do it, Dad. I did not mean to. I nodded slowly. You did not mean to, I repeated. But you did. Damage is not erased with intention, only with acts. He looked up. For the first time in a long time, I did not see anger in his eyes, but something closer to exhaustion, to repentance. Paulette approached, took a glass of water, and placed it in front of him. Drink, Michael, she told him softly. Words weigh less with a sip of water. My son looked at her, hesitant, and then murmured, Thank you, Aunt. Denise got up, crossed her arms, and spoke with a clear, serene voice, as if dictating a sentence that sought no punishment, but teaching, This is your moment, boy. You can leave this house. Look for work. Start over far from bottles and noise, or stay trapped in your own well. No one is going to get you out of there but yourself. Michael lowered his head, his voice reduced to a thread. And if I leave, what will you do, Dad? I will close the door, I told him, and I will plant new camellias in the garden, the ones your mother liked. I will wait for you to return with clean hands. He nodded barely, and in that gesture there was more understanding than in any apology. The wind from the porch lifted the curtain. Sunlight entered in perfect beams on the table. The smell of coffee mixed with that of patio flowers filled the room, and for an instant the house seemed to breathe again. At that moment, the sound of a car engine was heard. The front door opened slowly. It was David, the lieutenant, back. He stayed a second in the doorway, watching the scene. He said nothing, only with a nod of his head indicated it was time. Michael understood without anyone having to explain it to him. He stood up, slow, with defeated shoulders. His eyes roamed the room, the oven his mother used on Sundays, the tablecloth embroidered by her, the pictures on the wall with our photos from when he was a child. Every corner gave him back a piece of the life he had lost. He turned toward me. Dad, he said almost in a whisper. Here I am, I responded. I am sorry. I could only nod. There was nothing else to say. David approached, put a hand on his shoulder, and guided him toward the door. It was not an arrest. It was an accompaniment. The sound of his footsteps faded on the porch, and then the soft slam of the car door. Denise put her notebook in her bag. Before leaving, she looked at me with tenderness. Justice, George, does not always need bars. Sometimes a clear border is enough, this far. I followed her with my gaze as she left. The sun bathed her beige coat and made it shine for an instant, as if the morning blessed her for her firmness. Paulette, on the other hand, remained next to me. She touched my arm, her eyes wet. You did it, brother. You won. I smiled with weariness. I did not win. I only stopped the fall. On the floor, next to the chair where Michael had been, a folded sheet had remained. I picked it up. It was a piece of paper torn from my letter. In a corner, with clumsy handwriting, he had written, Thank you for not staying silent, Dad. I stared at those words for a long time, until they mixed with my tears. Then I walked to the living room and opened the frame of my wedding photo. I slipped the paper behind the image, right where Mary and I were smiling with the youth that no longer belongs to us. Paulette approached. Why there? She asked. Because she raised him too, I answered, and because she deserved to read it first. The sunlight crossed the window and fell on the portrait, illuminating for an instant the frozen faces in that photo. Paulette wiped her tears. It is beautiful, George. No, it is just fair, I said. I opened the window. A gust of fresh air entered, bringing with it the sweet aroma of jasmine growing by the fence. The curtains waved like sails, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the house was mine again. On the table remained the leftovers of breakfast, the biscuits no one had finished, the now cold coffee, and two facing chairs that seemed to wait for another conversation. I sat in mine, took the pot, and filled the cup once more. The coffee tasted bitter, but honest. I looked at the empty place in front of me, and for an instant I would swear to have heard Mary's voice, soft, distant, almost a sigh. "It is okay now, George. You can rest now," I smiled. A small smile, tired but real. Outside, the sun rose high over Savannah, painting the garden leaves gold. Inside, the clock marked 10:15. And in that warm silence, I understood that love, when mixed with discipline, does not wound, it saves. Breakfast was over, but for the first time in years, the morning made sense. I sat for a long time after the door closed. The cup remained in my hand, the coffee already cold, the steam gone a while ago. Through the large window, the morning light fell obliquely on the table, trapping in the air thousands of dust motes floating slowly, suspended as if time refused to advance. The sound of the patrol engine faded away, crunching the gravel path in front of the house. The wheels crushed the stones with a constant hypnotic rumble until silence returned to occupy its place. I got up slowly. My knees creaked, reminding me of the age I carried. I walked to the door and turned the latch. The air outside was fresh, with a smell of warm asphalt and damp oak leaves. On the threshold, Michael's steps were still marked on the porch wood, wet footprints with traces of dry mud from dawn. I did not erase them. I looked at them for a while, because erasing does not always mean cleaning. Sometimes it means forgetting. The distant tolling of the bells of St. Matthew's Church came floating between the branches. Each chime seemed to strike inside the chest, one for each year I had kept silent, one for each time I had let the unforgivable pass. I went out to the garden. The sun was already high, and the shadows of the trees stretched over the grass. The old truck was still parked under the same oak, covered by camellia petals that had fallen during the night. The flowers, still damp, shone as if they had just woken up. I ran my hand over the hood, and the drops slid slowly, as if measuring the time I had left. From the other side of the street, Mrs. Clarice, my neighbor, was watering her rose bushes. When she saw me, she raised a hand. "Everything seems quieter this morning, Mr. Hayes," she said with that warm voice of someone who takes interest without invading. "Everything okay?" I nodded with a slight smile. "Yes, Mrs. Clarice. Everything is in order, finally." "That makes me happy," she responded, and went back to her flowers without more questions. I returned to the house. The air inside still conserved the smell of apple pie, coffee, and old wood. Everything was familiar, but different. Calm now was not habit, it was conquest. At the table, Michael's chair was still pushed back, as if the echo of his body still weighed on it. I moved it closer slowly and put the one I had used in the same place, aligned with the edge of the tablecloth. The sunlight entered right through the window and bathed the back of the chair. It seemed like a living photograph, the portrait of an absence. Paulette came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a cloth. "They called from the station," she told me. "They say Michael wants to see you this afternoon." I took a few seconds to answer. "I will go," I said finally. "Alone? Yes." "Alone?" I did not say it out of pride, but because I knew that conversation had to belong solely to the two of us. Denise was still sitting at the head of the table. She had taken off her glasses and was looking toward the window, thoughtful. She took a sip of her cold coffee before speaking. "Good," she said. "He must see you without fear, but also without resentment. There is no greater punishment than the calm of someone who no longer needs to defend themselves." "Do you think he will change?" I asked. She smiled barely. "Not in a day. But today you showed him what it means to have a limit. The seed is there. What he does with it depends on him." I stood looking outside. A sparrow landed on the railing, turned its head, and let out a short trill before flying away. "Do you hear that?" I said. "It seems peace returned." Denise smiled. "Peace," she said, "does not return. It is built, and it is sustained every day one chooses not to surrender to hate." Paulette let out a low laugh. "Just like you, George. Stubborn but wise when it comes to stopping." I smiled sideways without answering. I approached the sideboard and opened the cracked glass door. The fragments of the broken glass from last night were still on the floor of the cabinet. I picked them up carefully, one by one, and put them in a cloth bag. When I finished, only one cup remained intact, the white porcelain one that had belonged to Mary. I took it with both hands, placed it in the center of the table, and poured a little coffee in it. The light went through it, and formed a small halo on the tablecloth, a golden circle that seemed to float. Inside that reflection I saw my face, wrinkled, tired but serene. The clock struck 10. Denise got up, closed her notebook, and approached me. "I have to go," she said. "Keep your head clear, George, and above all, do not close your heart." I shook her hand. "Thank you, Denise. If you had not been here, I do not know if I would have had the courage." "The courage you already had," she replied. "You just needed someone to remind you that you also deserve justice." I smiled. "And what is that, exactly, Denise? What is real justice?" She looked at me for an instant, then responded slowly, word for word, "Justice occurs when the wounded stops being silent." I accompanied her to the door. I watched her walk to her car, small under the sunlight, but with a presence that filled the street. She closed the door carefully, waved goodbye, and left. Silence returned, but this time it did not hurt. Paulette sat in front of me, cut a piece of pie, and slid it toward my side. "Eat something, George. A long day awaits you." I nodded and tried a bite. The taste of cinnamon filled my mouth, and for a moment I thought Mary would be proud of how I had resisted. The sun tilted slowly, bathing the table with golden tones. The house smelled of home again, not fear. I thought that perhaps true justice was not what was signed in a court, but what was born in a kitchen where someone dared to speak, where truth was served along with coffee, in front of witnesses who did not seek punishment, but balance. I collected the plates, washed the cups under hot water. The sound of the stream hitting the china was hypnotic, almost purifying. While drying my hands, my eyes landed on the folded piece of paper Michael had left on the table. I took it and read it again. "Thank you for not staying silent, Dad." They were only 6 words, written with the clumsiness of someone who did not know how to ask for forgiveness. But in their simplicity, there was an immense weight. I folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my coat. The clock marked 11:20. I took my jacket, the felt hat, and headed toward the door. Before leaving, I looked at the kitchen once more. I straightened the chairs, turned off the light, and let the natural clarity bathe the place. The smoke of the coffee still floated, lazy forming spirals that seemed to refuse to disappear. I stopped for an instant in the doorframe. The air smelled of jasmine, fresh bread, something resembling forgiveness. And while the sun caressed the walls of my house, I knew that the true instant of justice was not when Michael left with the agents, nor when I signed the report. It occurred now, in this clean silence, where I could finally breathe without fear. I went out to the path, closed the door behind me, and began to walk toward the station. Every step on the dust of the path sounded firm, measured, like the beat of a heart that has learned, finally, that justice and love can coexist in the same place. I arrived at the station at 11:45. The midday air was thick, with that smell of recent tar that rises from the asphalt when the sun falls right on top. The sky, clean, seemed bigger than normal. The distant hum of a truck mixed with the song of cicadas filled the silence of the street. David waited for me next to the entrance, arms crossed, expression serene but attentive. "He is in the waiting room," he said. "Take your time, George." I nodded. My breathing was slow, measured. I entered. The interior smelled of reheated coffee and old paper. The ceiling fan turned lazily, moving the dense air. On the wall there was a 2025 calendar, and next to it, a poster that said, "Keep calm and be decent." Michael was in a corner, sitting on a metal chair. He wore a gray t-shirt, the collar wrinkled, his head tilted, wrists still marked by the friction of the handcuffs. There was no rage in his posture, only tiredness. I approached, dragging the chair in front of him. David stayed a few meters away, giving us space. "Have you eaten anything?" I asked. He denied with a slight movement. I took out of a paper bag 3 fresh biscuits, still warm. I placed them on the table. "I brought you breakfast," I said. Michael looked up. His voice was low, almost a murmur. "The same ones from this morning?" "The same," I responded. "The breakfast of justice," as Denise called it. A fleeting smile crossed his face, closer to crying than laughing. He took one, held it a moment between his hands, and then took a small bite. Neither spoke for a good while. Only the hum of the fan and the occasional noise of the hallway were heard. I observed him in silence. He had a calmer face, less hardened. Every line of his expression seemed to say something words could not reach: repentance, shame, and a slight flash of relief. "Dad," he said finally, "I have thought about leaving. I have a friend in Macon. He offered me work in a shop. It is not much, but I can start there." I nodded. "It is for the best. Start over, Michael, but leave behind what weighs. Do not take it with you." "And you?" he asked. "Will you be okay alone?" I smiled barely. "Since you recognized what you did, I am already okay. I do not need more." He lowered his head. "I do not deserve for you to forgive me." "Forgiveness is not deserved, son," I responded. "It is learned. It is the second chance we give ourselves." David approached the door, raised his hand, indicating 5 minutes left. I stood up. "When are you leaving?" I asked. "This afternoon. They say I can leave before 3. I will go to see you off." "No need," he replied, with a firm look. "I want to do it alone." I stood looking at him. His posture, although fragile, had something I had not seen in years: decision. "Then do it," I told him. "But remember that this house has not closed for you, and the camellias will bloom again in spring." He nodded, swallowing saliva. "I will remember." We shook hands. It was a short, sincere squeeze. His palm was warm and, for the first time in a long time, firm. When I turned to leave, I heard him say in a low voice, "Thank you, Dad, for still being one, even when I did not deserve it." I did not answer. I only raised a hand without looking back. Outside, the light hit my face. The sun was at its highest point. The cicadas filled the air with their insistent song. I walked slowly to my truck. On the driver's seat was a copy of the Savannah Tribune I had not opened. In a corner, the headline said, "A local father faces the silence of domestic violence." I did not read it. I folded it and left it aside. I did not need the world to know what had occurred. The true news was inside me. The journey back was short. The road shone under the sun, and the hot air made the horizon ripple. When I got home, the dashboard clock marked 12 o'clock sharp. I opened the front door. The house was the same as I had left it. The smell of coffee, the clean dishes drying on the counter, the comfortable silence of a place that had survived the storm. Michael's chair was still empty, but it no longer hurt to see it like that. I approached the window and opened it. A gentle breeze entered, bringing with it the smell of the sea and the jasmine growing by the fence. I took the wedding photo frame and opened it from the back. Inside, between the cardboard and Mary's image, I slid Michael's note. "Thank you for not staying silent, Dad." I placed it carefully, closed the frame, and returned it to its place. "See, Mary," I said in a low voice, "there is still hope." I turned on the coffee maker. The gurgling of boiling water filled the kitchen with a familiar sound. I served a new cup. The bitter and sweet aroma spread through the whole room at once. The sun entered now, fully, painting the floor with golden reflections. The shadows of the leaves danced on the walls, as if someone played a silent melody. The clock struck 12:30. I rested my elbows on the table, holding the cup with both hands. I drank a slow sip, letting the heat rise through my chest. I thought, the breakfast of justice is only worth it if one learns to prepare the next beat. I looked around, the aligned cups, the fresh flowers in the vase, the empty chair, the stray cat that had just jumped onto the porch and was curling up on the rocking chair. "Good morning, little one," I told him from the window. "Everything is fine now. The cat lifted its head, looked at me, and curled back up. I breathed deeply. Outside, the sun reflected on the roof, and the air vibrated with the promise of a quiet afternoon. For the first time in many years, I did not feel fear of silence, nor of the past, nor of the next dawn. I just stayed there, with my coffee and the rumor of the wind, letting the house, the flowers, and the memories settle into their new order. Life, I thought, sometimes does not need great pardons or punishments, only a shared breakfast, an honest conversation, and the courage to start over. I took another sip, closed my eyes, and smiled. The clock marked 12:45, and the midday light filled the kitchen completely. The house breathed. I did too, and in that luminous stillness, I knew that justice had fulfilled its purpose, giving me back my peace.